A tired waitress notices an ancient ring on a quiet stranger's hand and casually repeats the forbidden words only the vampire king's lost queen ever knew. The man freezes, realizing the human in front of him carries a secret tied to his curse, his throne, and a love he buried centuries ago. In a simple diner, one sentence turns into a dangerous reunion that could break his reign or redeem it. I'm going to tell you this the way it happened, because I still don't fully understand it myself. Some nights feel ordinary right up, until the moment they split your life into before and after. The diner smelled like warm syrup and burnt coffee, the kind that clings to your clothes even after a long shower. Outside, rain tapped the windows in nervous little bursts, smearing the neon sign into a red and blue blur. The late shift was usually quiet, truckers, tired nurses, the occasional couple who couldn't sleep. But that night the air felt held, like the building was waiting for someone to breathe. Mara wiped down the counter for the third time, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do. Bills were stacked in her apron pocket like sharp folded paper, each one a reminder that her kindness didn't pay rent. Still, she'd refilled Mrs. Hernandez's tea without charging, and she'd packed an extra cookie for the kid at table 4. Mara had this stubborn belief that small kindnesses mattered, even when life didn't seem to care. The bell above the door didn't jingle when he entered. It should have, but it didn't. Mara looked up anyway, like her body noticed before her mind did. He moved with the calm of someone who'd never had to hurry. Tall, pale, dressed in a dark burgundy coat that looked too expensive for a roadside diner, yet somehow not out of place, like he belonged anywhere he stood. His hair was long and silver blonde, falling loose around his shoulders as if the rain had refused to touch it. What struck Mara most wasn't his beauty, though it was the kind that made you forget your own name for a second. It was the tiredness in him, carefully hidden, like a bruise beneath a sleeve. He chose the booth in the far corner, the one most people avoided because the overhead light flickered and the window leaked cold. He sat with his back to the wall, facing the room, not in a paranoid way, in a practiced way. Like he'd learned long ago that comfort was something you earned, not something you assumed. Mara grabbed a menu and a notepad and walked over, telling herself he was just another customer. Her shoes squeaked on the tile. The closer she got, the more she noticed little things that didn't fit. No steam rose from his breath in the cold draft, and his eyes, dark, almost black, reflected the diner lights too sharply, like glass catching a flame. "Hi," she said, keeping her voice light. "Coffee to start." He didn't answer right away. His gaze settled on her face with an intensity that wasn't rude, just searching. Mara felt like she'd stepped into a room where someone had been speaking her name. "Yes," he said at last, and his voice was low, smooth, with an accent she couldn't place. "Black." She nodded and turned to go, then paused because she saw his hand. On his right ring finger was a ring unlike anything Mara had ever seen. Gold, heavy, old-fashioned, the kind you'd imagine on a king in a painting. At its center sat a deep red stone, darker than a ruby, like a drop of wine held in place by delicate claws. Around it, tiny markings formed a circle, symbols that looked carved by someone who believed in magic. Mara wasn't the type to stare at jewelry, but something about that ring made her stomach tighten. Not fear exactly, recognition, as strange as that sounded. She walked back to the counter with a strange pressure behind her eyes, poured coffee, and tried to shake it off. The diner hummed with soft sounds, the sizzle of the grill, a fork scraping a plate, the radio playing a quiet old song. Everything normal. Yet Mara felt as if she'd just seen a ghost from a story she didn't remember reading. When she returned with the mug, he had his hands folded on the table like he was holding himself still. Mara set the coffee down gently. "Anything to eat?" she asked. He glanced at the menu but didn't open it. "No." Mara hesitated. People who came in the middle of the night and ordered only coffee were either lonely, broke, or running. This man looked like none of those and somehow all of them. "You sure?" she asked, softer now. "You look like you haven't slept." His eyes flicked up. For the first time, something like surprise crossed his face, thin and quick, gone before she could be sure it was real. Then he gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep is complicated," he said. Mara should have laughed politely and walked away. But her grandmother's voice, the one that lived in Mara's mind like a warm lamp, rose up. "Sometimes you're the only kindness a person meets all day." And there was something about this stranger's stillness that made Mara feel like kindness might matter more than usual. She refilled his water without being asked. She didn't know why, but it felt important. As she leaned forward to place the glass, the overhead light flickered again, and the ring caught the light in a way that made the stone look almost alive. For a second, Mara's mind flashed with an image she had no business seeing. A stone hall filled with candles, a crown laid on a velvet pillow, and a woman's laughter echoing like bells. Mara blinked hard, her pulse thudding. The image vanished, leaving only the clink of the water glass and the smell of coffee. "Are you okay?" the man asked quietly. Mara swallowed. "Yeah, sorry, just long shift." He watched her with a patience that felt older than politeness. "You are kind," he said. It was such a simple statement, but it landed in Mara's chest like a weight. Most people didn't notice kindness. They accepted it like it was their right. This man spoke it as if it mattered, as if it was rare. Mara tried to shrug it off. "It's part of the job." His gaze drifted to her name tag. Mara. He said it like he was testing how it sounded in his mouth. "Mara." She gave a quick nod, suddenly aware of the quiet between them. She should have stepped away. Instead, she found herself pointing at the ring before she could stop herself. "That's a serious ring," she said. "Family heirloom." The man's hand moved a fraction, not quite covering it but protecting it. "Something like that." Mara felt her cheeks warm. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "You noticed it," he said, almost to himself. "Hard not to," Mara replied, then added, "The stone is beautiful. It's not just jewelry, though, it looks important." For the first time, his composure cracked. The smallest tremor passed through his fingers, and the coffee in his mug rippled as if the table had been bumped. But Mara hadn't touched it. "Important," he repeated, and there was a quiet ache in the word. Mara didn't know why she did it next. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a trick. It was just something rising out of her memory like a melody you don't realize you know. Her grandmother used to tell her bedtime stories, old ones, strange ones, about a king who couldn't die and a queen who chose love anyway. Mara had always assumed they were just fairy tales meant to teach courage. But now, staring at the ring, she heard her grandmother's voice so clearly it made her throat tighten. Mara leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if speaking it aloud might break something. "My grandmother used to say a line," Mara murmured, half embarrassed, half compelled. "When someone was carrying grief like a secret, she'd say." The man looked up sharply, as if a bell had rung inside his skull. His dark eyes locked on hers. Mara spoke the words, simple and soft, not even understanding why they felt so heavy. "Even the night must kneel for the one who remembers." The diner seemed to go silent around them. The radio's song faded into the background like it had been pushed away. The rain against the windows turned distant. Mara realized she could hear her own heartbeat and the faint, careful sound of the man breathing, slow, controlled, like he was counting each inhale. He didn't blink. His hand froze above the table, fingers slightly curled, the ring's red stone catching the flickering light like an eye that had just opened. Mara felt fear rise at last, but it wasn't the fear of danger. It was the fear of realizing you've stepped onto a path you can't step off. "How?" he whispered, and his voice was no longer smooth. It was raw, like a door scraped open after centuries. "How do you know those words?" Mara's mouth went dry. I don't know. It's just something my grandmother said. It was a story." He leaned forward so quickly the booth creaked, and for the first time, Mara saw something beneath his stillness, an emotion so powerful it made him look almost human. Almost. He stared at her as if she were a letter delivered far too late. "No," he said, shaking his head once very slowly. "Those words were not a story." The overhead light flickered again, and this time it didn't recover. The corner booth fell into shadow, lit only by the neon blur through the rain-streaked window. The ring's stone glowed darkly, and Mara felt that strange pressure behind her eyes return, stronger now, like a memory pushing from the inside. Across the diner, the bell over the door finally jingled, sharp and wrong, and a gust of cold air swept in. Two men entered, wearing raincoats too clean for the weather, their eyes scanning the room like they were counting exits. The stranger in Mara's booth didn't look at them. He didn't have to. His body went perfectly still, not with fear, but with control, like a predator refusing to be seen. Mara stood there, caught between the ordinary world of coffee and menus and the impossible weight of the words she'd spoken. The new men's gaze landed on her, then shifted to the shadowed booth. The Vampire King, because somehow, deep down, Mara suddenly knew that was what he was, lifted his eyes to her with something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "Tell me," he said, barely moving his lips, "what else did your grandmother tell you about me?" And before Mara could answer, one of the men in raincoats started walking straight toward their booth. The man in the raincoat walked like he owned the tile beneath his boots, slow and certain, his eyes fixed on the shadowed booth as if he could see through darkness. Mara's hands tightened around her notepad so hard the paper creased, and she hated that her first instinct was to step back and disappear. In the booth, the pale stranger didn't move. He only lowered his gaze for the briefest moment, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear, then lifted his eyes to Mara again. There was a warning in them, quiet, urgent, almost gentle. "Don't run," he murmured. "They will follow your fear." Mara swallowed. Her throat felt too small for her breath. "Who are they?" His jaw tightened, and she noticed something she hadn't before: restraint. Not the kind that came from politeness, but the kind that came from someone who had power and refused to use it carelessly. "People who believe monsters should behave like monsters," he said, "and who punish the ones who don't." The raincoat man reached the edge of their booth. Up close, he smelled like cold air and clean metal, like the inside of an unused toolbox. He tilted his head, smiling without warmth. "Evening," he said to Mara, but his eyes stayed on the stranger. "We've been looking for you." Mara forced her voice to work. "He's just having coffee." The man's smile widened a fraction, as if he enjoyed how small her words sounded against his certainty. "That's a lovely story." Behind the counter, Gus the cook glanced up from the grill. Gus was all rounded shoulders and tired eyes, the kind of man who acted gruff but always slipped extra fries onto plates. He frowned, sensing the shift in the room. The stranger finally spoke to the raincoat man. "You shouldn't bring your business here." "It's always your business," the man replied. "You left without permission." Mara's mind snagged on that. Permission. Like the stranger belonged to something, like he'd been owned. A second raincoat figure hung near the door, scanning the diner. Customers, exits, the bathroom, hallway, moving with practiced caution. Not drunk troublemakers, not ordinary. Mara's heart hammered, but a stubborn heat rose in her chest too. This was her workplace, her small patch of dignity. Whatever this was, it had dragged itself into her night and expected her to shrink. Gus called out from the counter, forcing cheer into his voice. "Hey, you folks ordering food or just blocking my aisle?" The first raincoat man didn't look away, just catching up with an old friend. The stranger's fingers tightened around the coffee mug. The ring on his hand flashed once under the failing light, red stone catching neon like a trapped ember. Mara's gaze dropped to it again, and the pressure behind her eyes returned, sharp enough to make her blink. A memory that wasn't hers flickered. Candlelight, velvet, a hand placing that same ring into another palm, and a voice saying, "Even the night must kneel," like a vow, not a story. Mara's breath hitched. The stranger noticed. His composure faltered in a way so human it hurt to see. "Mara," he whispered, as if her name were an anchor. "Stay with me. Don't let the memories pull you under." The raincoat man's eyes narrowed. "So it's true," he said softly. "You brought it here. You brought her words here." Mara felt her stomach drop. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man leaned closer, and his voice lowered to something almost polite. "Of course you don't. Humans rarely know what they carry until someone takes it from them." Something cold ran down Mara's spine. She stepped back instinctively, and the stranger's hand lifted, just slightly, an unconscious protective gesture. "Don't," the stranger warned, not to Mara, to the man. That single word held a weight that made the air feel heavier. The raincoat man paused, then smiled like someone who'd just been challenged. "You still pretend you're civilized," he said, "after everything." The stranger's eyes darkened, and Mara realized what pretend meant in that mouth. It meant weak. It meant unworthy. It meant different in a way that deserved punishment. Mara surprised herself by speaking before fear could stop her. "If you have a problem with him, take it outside. Don't threaten people in my diner." The raincoat man finally looked at her fully. His gaze traveled from her name tag to her face, lingering as if he were measuring her bones. Then his expression changed, not to kindness, to recognition. "What are you?" he murmured, almost fascinated. Mara's skin prickled. "A waitress." The stranger's voice turned low and urgent again. "Mara, please, go to the kitchen, now." She should have listened, but something in her refused to abandon him in that booth, cornered like a hunted thing. "I'm not leaving," she said, quieter than before. "Not if you're in trouble." The stranger's eyes widened slightly, and for a heartbeat, the tiredness in him softened into something else. Gratitude, maybe, or grief. "You don't understand what that costs," he said. "I understand what it costs to do nothing," Mara shot back, surprising herself with the steadiness in her tone. Gus set down his spatula with a loud clack. "All right," he said, stepping out from behind the counter. "Everybody calm down. If there's going to be an argument, you do it somewhere else. I'm not losing my license over some midnight drama." The raincoat man's smile vanished. His patience snapped like a thin wire. He took a step toward Gus, and Mara's chest tightened. But the stranger moved first. He didn't lunge. He didn't bare teeth. He simply rose from the booth with a smoothness that made the movement look effortless, like gravity had agreed to treat him gently. He positioned himself between the raincoat man and Gus, shoulders relaxed, palms open. A peaceful stance. A warning. "Leave them," the stranger said. "Your quarrel is with me." For a second, Mara felt something in the room shift, like the lights dimmed out of respect. Like the air recognized him. The raincoat man hesitated. His eyes flicked to the ring again, then back to the stranger's face. "Your Majesty," he said, the title dripping with mockery. "Still playing guardian to the livestock." Mara flinched at the word. Gus stiffened, confused, offended, but more than that, hurt. The stranger's expression tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that made Mara's skin prickle. "They are not livestock. They are people. They are alive for such a short time that every kindness matters." The second raincoat figure near the door shifted, as if unsettled by the sincerity. Mara caught it, just a flicker of uncertainty. These weren't mindless bullies. They were believers, and believers were the hardest to stop. The first raincoat man scoffed. "This is why the council stripped you of the throne. You got sentimental. You forgot what we are." The stranger's gaze held steady. "No," he said, "I remembered." Mara's breath caught. The words landed like a confession. Gus cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Look, man, whoever you are, if you're gonna scare my staff, you can pay and leave." The stranger reached into his coat and set something on the table, a small stack of bills, more than enough to cover every meal in the diner twice over. He did it without looking, like money had never been the point. Then he looked at Mara and his eyes softened. "I'm sorry," he said, and the apology sounded old, practiced, and real. "I didn't come here to pull you into my night." Mara felt the ache behind her eyes swell again. "Then why did you come?" He hesitated, as if the truth hurt too much to speak in a place that smelled like pancakes and safety. "Because I heard your voice in a dream," he admitted, "and I haven't dreamed in a very long time." The raincoat man's head tilted. "A dream," he repeated, amused. "How romantic." The stranger ignored him. His gaze stayed on Mara. "That line you spoke," he said, voice roughening. "Only one person ever said it to me. She said it when I was still foolish enough to believe I could protect everyone." Mara's mouth went dry. "My grandmother." "Your grandmother," the stranger interrupted gently, "may have been closer to my world than you know." Mara's hands trembled. She hated that part of her wanted to laugh at the impossibility, and another part wanted to cry because it felt like someone had finally put words to the strange emptiness she'd carried since childhood. Like she'd been missing a chapter of her own life. The raincoat man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, flat object, metallic, etched with symbols similar to the ring. He held it up, and the diner light seemed to bend around it. Mara's breath stuttered. The object made her teeth ache, like standing too close to a loudspeaker. The stranger's shoulders stiffened. "Put that away." "No," the man said, pleased. "You're coming with us, and if she's what we think she is," his gaze slid to Mara, "then she's coming too." Gus took a step forward. "Nobody's taking anybody." The stranger lifted a hand, not threatening but firm. "Gus," he said, and somehow he knew the cook's name without being told. "Please, take the customers to the back. Lock the office door, keep them safe." Gus hesitated, pride battling fear. Then he looked at Mara, his employee, his responsibility, and something softened in him. "All right," he muttered. "All right, everybody listen up. Bathroom hall now, let's go." Chairs scraped. People stood, confused, grumbling, but moving. The diner's ordinary noise returned in a shaky wave, murmurs, footsteps, the clink of plates, trying to pretend this was just a weird argument. Mara didn't move. The stranger's eyes found hers again, and this time there was no warning, only a quiet plea. "Mara," he said, voice barely more than breath. "If they take you, they will not treat you as a person. They will treat you as a key." Mara's pulse roared in her ears. A key to what? He swallowed, and for the first time he looked afraid. Not for himself. "For the crown I refused," he whispered, "and for the prison I built to keep it from harming the world." The raincoat man stepped closer, impatience returning. "Enough," he snapped. "Your Majesty, you will come quietly. If you force us to make a scene, the humans will pay for your pride." The stranger's eyes flashed, and the air seemed to sharpen. Mara felt it like a storm building, power restrained by choice. Then, to Mara's shock, the stranger did something she didn't expect from a king or a monster. He bowed his head. A humble, deliberate motion, like an apology to the room, to the world, to her. "I will come," he said. Mara stared. "No." He lifted his gaze to her, and the sadness in his eyes was so deep it made her chest ache. "Not with them," he added softly. "With you." Before Mara could process what that meant, he slid his ringed hand across the table toward her, palm up, offering it like a trust fall. "Take my hand," he said, "and don't be afraid of what you see." Mara's breath caught. Her fingers hovered above his, trembling. The raincoat man lunged a half-step forward. "Don't touch him." Mara should have listened to the warning. But the stranger's hand was steady, waiting, and Mara realized something with a sudden clarity that made her heart burn. Courage wasn't loud. Courage was choosing kindness when fear begged you to be selfish. She placed her hand in his. The ring's red stone pulsed once, warm against her skin, like a heartbeat answering her own, and the diner vanished. Mara gasped as candlelight flooded her vision, as if a door inside her had been kicked open. She saw a throne room. She saw snow falling through a broken roof. She saw the stranger, young in a different way, still ancient, kneeling beside a woman whose face she couldn't quite see. And then the woman turned, and Mara saw her own eyes looking back at her. The vision snapped tighter, dragging her forward, and in the real diner she heard Gus shouting her name from far away, like he was calling from the end of a tunnel. The raincoat man's voice cut through the air, sharp with triumph. "There you are," he said, staring at Mara like she'd just proven his suspicion. "Your Majesty, you brought the queen back." Mara couldn't breathe. She couldn't pull her hand away. The stranger's grip tightened, not to trap her, but to keep her from falling apart. And as the ring's warmth spread through her palm like rising dawn, Mara understood that whatever her grandmother had hidden from her was no longer hidden. It was awake. The diner snapped back into focus like a radio finding its station. Mara's fingers were still wrapped around the vampire king's hand, and the ring's warmth was fading, but the echo of candlelight and snow still trembled behind her eyes. Across the table, he looked less like a stranger now and more like a man carrying an impossible history in his chest. His face was calm, but his gaze kept flicking to Mara's expression as if he was reading pain the way others read weather. When the raincoat man said, "The queen," the king didn't correct him. He only breathed out, slowly, like the words hit an old wound he'd never allowed to heal. Mara tried to pull her hand back, but her palm tingled as if the ring had left a mark under her skin. "I'm not," she began, then stopped, because the sentence felt untrue in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't feel like a queen or anyone special. She felt like a waitress with overdue bills and tired feet, and yet when she looked at the king, something in her recognized him with a terrifying tenderness. The raincoat man lifted the etched metal piece again, holding it between two fingers like a badge. The air around it hummed, and the overhead lights flickered harder, as if the diner itself was flinching. "You'll come with us," he said, voice steady and practiced, "and you'll bring the key. No more running. No more pretending you're something you're not." The king's eyes narrowed, not in rage but in focus. "I am exactly what I am," he said softly, "and because of that, I won't let you turn her into a tool." The second agent by the door shifted, uneasy. His gaze darted to the customers disappearing down the hallway with Gus, then back to Mara, like he was seeing the humans in the room as people for the first time. It was a tiny hesitation, almost nothing, yet it felt like the kind of crack where hope could slip in. Mara's mind raced. "What do you want from me?" she asked, forcing the words past her fear. "If I'm a key, what does that even mean?" The king's throat moved as he swallowed. He didn't answer right away, like the truth had sharp edges. "A crown was made," he said, voice low. "That can command the night itself. The council wants it. I locked it away where even I couldn't reach it, and the lock was bound to a vow, to her voice." Mara's chest tightened. Her voice, like those words I said. His gaze softened with something like regret. "Yes." The raincoat man's smile returned, thin and satisfied. "Listen to him," he said to Mara, almost friendly. "He's telling you what you are. You can stop being nobody. You can matter." Mara hated that the offer tried to slide into her heart where her insecurities lived. Stop being nobody. It sounded like every bad night she'd ever had, every time she'd felt invisible. For a second, the temptation wasn't power, it was being seen. Then she remembered the way the king had said, "You are kind," like kindness was rare and holy. She remembered Gus stepping out from behind the counter to protect his staff. She remembered her grandmother giving away soup when they barely had enough. Being nobody had never stopped them from doing something good. "I already matter," Mara said, her voice shaking but real. "Not because I'm a key, because I choose what I do." The king's eyes lifted, and the relief in them was so raw it nearly broke her. The raincoat man's expression hardened. "Enough," he snapped. "Take them." The first agent reached toward Mara's wrist. The king moved, not with violence, not with fury, but with speed so controlled it looked like a miracle of restraint. He placed his hand between Mara and the agent's, palm open. The ring flashed, and the air thickened for a heartbeat, like a curtain dropping. Mara blinked, and the agent's reach faltered. His eyes went unfocused, as if he suddenly couldn't remember why he was angry. The second agent near the door took a step back, startled. "It's not mind control," the king said quietly, almost as if he were ashamed of needing any power at all. "It's a mercy, a pause, long enough for them to choose." Mara's breath caught. Even now, cornered, he was still giving his enemies a chance to be better. Gus's voice boomed from the hallway. "Mara, back here now." Mara's instincts screamed to run, but she looked at the king. "Can you come with me?" she whispered. His expression flickered, like the question hurt. "If I follow you," he said, "they will follow you harder." "Then we don't go alone," Mara replied. The words surprised her with their steadiness. "We go together." For a moment, it felt like the whole diner held its breath. Then the king gave the smallest nod, like he was accepting a gift he didn't believe he deserved. He guided Mara out of the booth, keeping his body between her and the agents without making it a threat. They moved toward the kitchen, where the smell of grease and onions suddenly felt like safety. Gus grabbed Mara's elbow, eyes wide, jaw tight with protective anger. "What did you get yourself into?" he hissed. "I don't know," Mara whispered back, "but please trust me." Gus looked at the king, really looked, and whatever he saw there wasn't what he expected. Not a monster, not a thug, just a man too still, too tired, too careful. Gus exhaled through his nose like he was making a decision with his whole life. "All right," he muttered. "I got a back door, it sticks, don't yank it." Behind them, the raincoat man's voice snapped through the diner. "Stop! You can't leave." The king didn't turn. He leaned slightly toward Mara, voice barely audible over the sizzling grill. "When we step outside," he murmured, "don't let go of my hand. Whatever you are feeling, fear, doubt, don't feed it to them. They hunt what breaks." Mara's throat tightened. "What if I break anyway?" His eyes met hers. In that second, the vampire king looked less like an immortal ruler and more like someone who had been alone for too long. "Then I will hold you," he said simply. "Not as a king, as a person." Gus shoved the back door open, and cold rain rushed in, soaking the threshold and turning the alley into shining black glass. The moment Mara stepped out, the night air slapped her awake. A distant car passed on the highway, tires hissing, as if the world was still normal somewhere. They sprinted into the alley, Mara's shoes slipping once on wet pavement. The king steadied her without slowing, his grip firm, careful, almost protective in a way that made her chest ache. Behind them, the back door banged open. Footsteps. The raincoat men were coming. Mara's lungs burned as they reached the alley's end, where a chain-link fence blocked the way. Beyond it was a narrow slope down to a drainage path that led toward the darker edge of town. It wasn't a perfect escape. It was just the only one. Gus grabbed the fence and shook it. "Locked!" he cursed under his breath. He looked around wildly, searching for a solution with the panic of a man who didn't know magic existed and didn't care. He would still fight it. The king's gaze locked on the chain. He could have torn it apart, Mara somehow knew that. But instead he did something far stranger. He stepped back, took a slow breath, and lowered his head as if in prayer. The ring pulsed once, and the rain around them seemed to shift. Not stopping, not changing direction, just becoming louder, thicker, a curtain of sound and motion. In the diner doorway, the raincoat men emerged and hesitated, scanning the alley. Their eyes slid right past Mara, Gus, and the king as if the rain itself refused to let them focus. Mara stared, stunned. "You can hide us." The king's voice was rough. "For seconds, not minutes, and it costs." Gus didn't question it. He yanked off his apron, wrapped it around his hand, and jammed his fingers into the chain mechanism like he'd done 100 stubborn repairs on 100 stubborn nights. His face tightened with effort, and then, click, the lock gave. "Go," Gus snapped. They pushed through the fence, slipping down the wet slope, grabbing weeds and roots to keep from falling. Mara's heart hammered with fear and adrenaline, but under it all was something else. A fierce, stubborn joy that they were not giving up, that they were moving. They reached the drainage path and ran, shoes splashing through shallow puddles. The town's lights behind them blurred into smeared color. Ahead, the path led into a shadowed stretch of trees and concrete where the world felt older. Then Mara's head swam. A new memory struck, not a flash of a throne room this time, but something painfully ordinary. A kitchen table, her grandmother's hands, a small brass key on a chain, and her grandmother's voice clear as a bell inside Mara's skull. "When the red stone wakes, you go to the place that still remembers daylight." Mara stumbled, nearly falling. The king caught her instantly, pulling her close enough that she could feel the cold of him through his coat and the careful warmth of his restraint. "Mara," he whispered, alarmed, "what did you see?" She grabbed his sleeve, rain dripping from her hair, eyes wide with sudden understanding and dread. "My grandmother," she panted. "She left something, a key, and she said there's a place that remembers daylight." The king's face drained of what little color it had, as if that phrase was a name he'd sworn never to speak. "No," he murmured, "not that place." Footsteps splashed behind them again, closer than they should have been. The council hadn't lost them. They de-adapted. Mara tightened her grip on the king's sleeve, voice breaking on the question she was suddenly afraid to ask. "What is that place?" The king looked toward the faint gray thinning at the edge of the sky, where night was beginning to loosen its hold. His voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with dread and devotion. "It's where I buried the crown," he said, "and where the sun should not reach me." And as the first hint of dawn threatened the horizon, the pursuing footsteps drew nearer, and Mara realized their escape had only led them to a choice: run deeper into darkness, or race toward the one place that could destroy him.